Welcome to the Introduction to Image Analysis course. This is our 12th lecture, and it is about feature extraction. What do we mean, and what do we want to achieve by feature extraction? Let's give a couple of examples. Our first example is about quantitative analysis of an image, and you are familiar with it. This is your task in Lab 3. You were given this image with coins, and you were supposed to estimate the amount of money in this image. You may be solving this task slightly differently, but the main steps in a typical pipeline are probably that you first segment the image and identify individual coins, and then you measure their size. And then you group the coins based on the size, and you count what you have in different groups, and you then interpret the content and are able to estimate the amount of money. So this decision to measure the size of the coins is based on your a priori knowledge that there exists some relation between the size and the nominal value of each coin. And this size is then this characteristic feature, this discriminative feature that you are basing, you're really relying on when performing this quantitative analysis. So you can measure the size by measuring area or radii of the coins. You can perform some histogram analysis of different sizes then and conclude the task. Another example is related to a task of classification. So here are 3 different species of an iris flower, and it appears that to differentiate between these 3 different species, it is enough to know the length and the width of these 2 types of, let's say, leaves in a flower. So these are called sepals and petals, and these 4 features, 2 lengths and 2 widths, in different combinations can describe each of these flowers in a way that they can be distinguished. This is the result that was published in 1936 by Fischer and led to quite well-known further statistical analysis results and classification approaches. We will be back to that in our classification lecture. Further, we can consider a task of segmentation. Here we want to do color-based segmentation, and we want to do it pixel-wise. So if each pixel is described by the amount of red, green, and blue color in its color content, that particular feature or combination of 3 features can be then used to segment this image, to actually perform, let's say, classification into different groups, which are then present as the main segments in this particular image. So stamen, leaf, stalk, and background is what you can identify here. Again, the color content was the crucial feature based on which this task could be solved. If we want to differentiate between 2 species of salmon, or rather farmed and wild salmon, it appears that we should look for this particular difference in their shape close to their tails. So there is some shape feature which is enough for us to focus on and to solve the task of distinguishing between farmed and wild salmon. If we, on the other hand, want to distinguish between salmon and the trout, then we should actually focus on textural feature, on intensity variation, rather than shape, because these 2 have really almost identical shape. However, textural intensity variation is what we can take as a discriminative feature to then distinguish between these two species. Finally, we talked about feature-based registration in our previous lecture, and there we were talking about some, let's say, helpful points in our images, helpful in the sense that they are distinct, that we can detect them, we can use them so that we establish correspondences between the two images. So there are particular feature points with some particular properties that we needed and could rely on to solve the task of correspondence and further on alignment of the two images. So these examples are all related to different image analysis or processing tasks. So it was some quantitative analysis of the image and its content, it was classification, it was segmentation, it was registration, and all of these relied on something very particular, selected particularly to address that task, and is then this important feature of the image or its parts that is essential for our current task that we want to perform. When we looked at our image analysis pipeline, then this feature extraction and description step was following segmentation and is then proceeding classification, interpretation, and recognition. And even though from our examples it is quite clear that this is not the only way to position it, since we had an example where we could say that feature extraction was actually a way to perform segmentation or a way to perform image registration, which is then still a bit earlier or somehow a bit off this main pipeline. It is quite, let's say, illustrative to position feature extraction and description here after segmentation, which means that we found relevant parts of the image that we are interested in, and now we want to focus on some relevant properties of these relevant parts, which will help to simplify the content of the image when performing further higher level tasks, such as understanding of our image content, so that we focus on what is most important and hopefully simple enough to have efficient and effective further analysis. My plan for this lecture is to have a very high overview of the whole task of feature extraction. So to say very briefly, again, to summarize in a way what and how we want to do. And then to somehow focus on two slightly different approaches, depending on if we are extracting features of the whole image, or we are extracting features of a particular object, of a region in the image, a region of interest. And since there are really very many different features that can be relevant in in a variety of different tasks that you can encounter when doing image analysis, then the idea here is not to go through some exhaustive description of all of them, but rather to give some hints on how they may look to inspire you when you are further on looking for some particular features. What is that? What can be of help? How do I think about what is relevant? What are important properties that I can try to focus on for every particular task that I may encounter? So it is just, as said, a small selection of different descriptors with an aim to give actually just a higher level understanding of what are the main tasks, main, let's say, topics within this story on feature extraction. In the end, of course, we will come to some summary and further reading. So if I'm giving a very high level idea of feature extraction and what and how, I can say that feature extraction is usually seen as consisting of two main steps. One is to detect the features, and the other one is then the second one is to describe these detected features. When we are detecting the features, we are aiming for distinctiveness. So the features should be, let's say, relatively easy to identify in different images, in different objects, and also some amount of invariance, because we want to be able to detect the same features even if our scenes, our objects appear slightly different in different images due to presence of noise, some transformation, and so on. Once when the features are detected, we would like to describe them, to have some efficient encoding of these features that will enable that they can easily be interpreted, maybe matched with the corresponding features in the other image, or are efficient in any classification task. So there should be, these descriptions should have suitable discriminative power. They also should be efficient to compute, hopefully simple to compute, fast to compute, and so on. Another, let's say, big, let's say, separation or classification of the main directions in feature extraction is, as already mentioned, are we describing the whole image? Are we extracting features from the whole image? Or we are looking at its parts, maybe segmented objects? And also, or closely related, are we looking at shape or texture? So there will be different descriptors for images, for their identified relevant parts, for shape, and for texture. And as said, we will give a couple of examples for each of these. Let us talk about image features. We would like to establish correspondence between a pair of images which show the same scene, but are taken from different viewpoints. We talked about this task when talking about image registration, and then we wanted to use characteristic features, characteristic points in the two images that we can identify, localize, and match. And then based on that, estimate the transformation that would align one image with another. When looking for the candidates for these feature points, we would like to find points and and look at the surrounding context that is called the patch around, which enable to identify the correspondence. And these three examples show three different types of patches that can surround a certain point. These two are quite flat, and it is very difficult to localize a feature point based on such patches. There are a number of transformations that we can apply to each of these patches, and they will still look the same. And a localization, precise localization of the corresponding points will not be possible at all. When we look at these two corresponding patches, which are then appearing here in the two images, we have much more of a content, much more of a structure that we can rely on. However, there are still transformations that are not possible to distinguish, or let's say it is not possible to localize exactly the point along this linear structure. So correspondences between these two patches along this linear structure will not be exact enough. Finally, if we look at this pair of patches and look at the corner point or corner-like point that appears in them, we can quite easily notice that localization, exact localization of the points will be possible because any kind of, let's say, transformation of any of the two patches can be rather easily identified for our visual system and then for our automated system as well. Another aspect that we would like to cover when looking for suitable feature points is that they should be detectable also under transformations due to, for example, different viewpoints, but also maybe other types of transformations such as intensity transformations or even in presence of noise. So in this example, we have corresponding images under affine transformation and a number of relevant feature points that are successfully detected in both of them. So these feature points are then surrounded by, there are centers of these ellipses or circles that we see and are obviously appearing in both of the two images. So this is successful detection of feature points in spite of this affine transformation that acted on the two images. And that is what we would like to achieve with our feature points. We want to look for those that can be identified in the corresponding pair of images, also under affine transformations or some other relevant changes that can happen. So summarizing what we would like to do when performing feature extraction in the images, in the step of feature detection, we would like to identify points, of course, with a portion of the surrounding region that is called patch, so that these points can be simultaneously and reliably located in the corresponding pair of images in presence of noise or spatial or intensity transformations that may act on the two images. The step of feature description will then focus on some representation, some encoding of the information, usually from the patch that surrounds our feature point, so that we can provide descriptions which are discriminative enough in the sense that similar or corresponding points will have similar enough descriptions, while the different points, non-corresponding points, will have non-similar or different enough descriptions. So these are the ideas or the main tasks behind feature detection and feature description. So let us say something about feature detection step. We said what we would like our feature points to be. So they should be distinctive, frequently spread in the image, easy to detect preferably. They should be invariant under image degradation, and they should be surrounded by rich content. That is what we analyzed in the previous examples. And that tells us then what our feature detector algorithms should focus on. To ensure distinctiveness, we would like to look for corners. That was also exemplified in the previous slides. And to ensure invariance, we would like our detectors to be somehow sensitive to features in different scales, maybe different viewpoints, presence of noise, and so on. So we would like to find feature points which are correspondent in the two images where there was some rotation and change of scale acting, maybe some blur. These feature points are then surrounded by rich context that can be used to describe the exact feature point. So location that is actually some kind of corner point here. And these descriptors then, the description of the patch around the feature point, can be used, can be compared so that we identify those points that are similar from those that are not. What are the available algorithms that can help us to find such feature points? The first one we are mentioning is Hessian. Hessian is a matrix of second-order partial derivatives, and since we know that images are usually quite noisy and we can't avoid presence of noise, I am reminding here that we use typically Gaussian derivatives, which means that we are smoothing our image first and then computing derivatives. And such a matrix of second-order derivatives describes local curvature of a multivariate function in general, and that then holds for our image function as well. So this is how the Hessian matrix looks. And then we are looking at the determinant of this matrix, and it appears that maxima of the determinant of the Hessian matrix can identify corner points or points with high curvature where, let's say, change happens in more than one direction, which can happen at the corners, but also at some regions with strong textural changes. We usually have to use some further processing, such as non-maxima suppression that we talked about before, to locate these exact maxima in the Hessian determinant. But essentially, this detector will enable that we find the corner points and strong textures. However, we will manage to avoid those points where the change happens in only one direction. So linear structures that will not be, the Hessian detector will not have strong response to them. Here is an example of performance of the Hessian corner detector on this image, which contains a number of different shapes. What we need to compute are second-order derivatives, and they're shown here. And then we need to compute the determinant of the Hessian matrix, which means that we are multiplying these two images and subtracting the square of this one. And then we need to find maxima of that determinant function. These detected maxima are then shown here. And if overlaid on the original image, they correspond to the corners, to the corner points in this original image, as expected. To look for changes in the surrounding region of a point, we don't necessarily need to look at the second-order derivatives. We can also use gradient or first-order derivatives. Harris detector is based on that. It also detects corner-like structures, and it looks for change that happens in the surrounding of an image in more than one direction. It relies on this matrix, which contains derivatives, first-order derivatives in x and y direction. Here they're squared, and then here they're multiplied with some suitable Gaussian smoothing to improve robustness to noise. And then what is needed is eigenvalue analysis of this matrix. So we are looking for eigenvalues of this matrix and looking for points where eigenvalues are both large and quite similar in size. That will correspond to corner points, as opposed to, for example, points where eigenvalues of this matrix are such that one is much bigger than the other, which indicates change only in one direction and would identify linear structures, or the points where the corresponding eigenvalues are small, which then indicates that there is no big change around that point, and that the point is actually a part of a flat region, and we are not interested in these either. So we want to find eigenvalues of this matrix, but instead of computing eigenvalues, we can simplify the procedure and use this dependence between the eigenvalues of this matrix and its determinant and its trace. So forming this expression, which then is that we need the determinant of this matrix, square minus squared trace with some suitable scaling factor. We look for high values of this expression. So we apply some suitable thresholding, and strong responses, strong values of this expression would then be strong responses of the Harris detector, and they will then correspond to corner points. Harris detector is robust to noise, illumination changes, and rotation. And here is a comparison of performance of the Hessian and Harris detectors on this image. We see that Hessian detects more points. Some of them are not corner points, but some, let's say, points with strong textural changes. Harris focuses on the corner points as expected. None of these is invariant to change of scale. So if we would like, if you want to have a detector that can detect feature points even if there is some change in scale present in our image, we need to look at the scale space. We need to look at our images at different scales. And we remember talking a bit briefly, but still mentioning scale space, that scale space is defined by taking an image and then applying Gaussian smoothing to it and taking Gaussians with increasing sigma. By that, we are removing details from our image, and we are essentially looking at our image at a range of different scales. We can use individual images in these scale spaces computed for our corresponding images when we are computing their feature points. But what is maybe more beneficial is then to look for particular other functions suitable for scale space analysis in the way that their maximal response in the scale space indicates not only a location of a certain feature, but also scale, which is characteristic for that particular feature point. So where there is the response is the strongest for that particular feature point. One of such functions that we can use, detectors, is log, Laplacian of Gaussian. And if we look at maxima of log in the scale space of an image, we can find, as said, a characteristic feature point, and by looking at where that maximum is achieved, we can also attach a certain characteristic scale to that point. That is usually shown by, as shown here, by identifying points and then having some, let's say, circle around them, and the size of that circle corresponds to the scale at which the point is then detected as being the maximum. To approximate Laplacian of Gaussian, we can use difference of Gaussians. That is quite good approximation, and then the response is quite similar in the sense that there are again provided information about feature points, and by these differently sized circles, information about a particular scale where these features are detected as being maximum. And since difference of Gaussian is used as an approximation of Laplacian of Gaussian, it is also good to see that these two images generate quite similar responses by these two detectors. Here is an example of performance of Harris detector and DOG. So Harris, as we commented, is not invariant to scale. So when we work with Harris detector, we are focused on one particular scale. If we want to incorporate scale invariance, then we can go for DOG. And then the features that are identified are obviously many more in this image where DOG is applied, because of this detection at multiple scales, which then also is included in the final information, since these points are surrounded by differently sized circles. Here we have fewer points, and they're all then to be like corresponding with the one to the right, are all identified by the same sized circle. All these good ideas that we discussed in connection with different feature detectors are nicely combined in a very well-known feature detector and descriptor, which is named SIFT, which stands for Scale Invariant Feature Transform. SIFT was published in 2004 by David Lowe and was patented, and this patent expired in March 2019, which now allows SIFT to be more freely used. SIFT performs really well, which makes it very popular. You will try it in your lab 4. It is also quite complex, quite much engineered with a number of different steps performed, and with very many parameters that come along. We will talk a bit about SIFT. We will not go in too many details, but we'll try to emphasize some of the main ideas behind this important algorithm. So what are these important ideas that are inbuilt in SIFT and that we already talked about? First, SIFT is scale invariant, and that is achieved by looking at the scale space. And that is already commented in connection with the log and DOG. So these ideas will propagate to SIFT. SIFT is rotation invariant, and that is achieved by certain normalization with respect to the orientation of the detected points and corresponding patches or the surrounding region. By focusing on the strong responses of the inbuilt detectors, SIFT achieves invariance to contrast change, looking for good contrast in the detected features. It also is robust to noise. So, as mentioned, SIFT is both feature detector and feature descriptor, and we will comment a bit on what is included in each of these parts of the algorithm. So, as detector, SIFT identifies, detects features which are invariant to scale, rotation, and intensity changes, and are robust to noise and 3D viewpoint changes. So quite nice, long, extensive wish list that we might have about feature detector. Then these features are, within the algorithm, described in a suitable way. This description, which we will comment in a bit more detail later on, is a vector of 128 values, which are essentially histogram based. So we will comment on that. This histogram includes gradient directions around each point, and by that improves specific description of the content around the subtle changes, let's say, of the content around each point. So the main steps that then can be like presented in a bit structured way are within this detection part of the algorithm. There is analysis of scale space where extremal points are detected. So first the scale space is constructed, and then dog feature is essentially computed quite conveniently. Once when the maxima are detected, maxima of dog in the scale space, as commented a couple of slides ago, then interpolation in the scale space is performed so that localization of these identified points is quite accurate, which is quite important. And then some, let's say, elimination of less stable points is performed. So the first low contrast key points or feature points are eliminated, and finally edges or response to linear structures is eliminated, so that finally corner points are detected. Then we commented that SIFT is rotation invariant, so there is a step where some principal orientation of the feature point is detected. And finally, there is this step where this 128 long feature vector is computed for each feature point. A bit more in details about these steps. So first, we commented that we need to create a scale space, and that means that we are smoothing our image with a range of different sigma Gaussian filters with different sigma values. And in SIFT, that is done in a quite structured and well-controlled way. So SIFT creates a scale space in terms of what is known as octaves. So these are these stacks of images in our in scale space, where smoothing is done so that we use certain value of sigma, and then we use k times that sigma, k squared times that sigma, and so on. In the next octave, we start with 2 sigma, and then we use k times 2 sigma, and we continue with k squared, and so on. And usually usually there are 3 octaves created, so there is quite some of scale space created and suitable analysis further performed. There are some recommended values for the starting sigma and for the starting k that will then be used to multiply sigmas for consecutive smoothing. Once when all these smooth images are created, computation of dog difference of Gaussians is quite simple, since these different Gaussian smoothed images are then in each of these octaves, then just the neighboring ones are subtracted, and we have dog feature computed in the scale space. The next step is then to look for extremal values of the dog feature in this scale space. So it's usually 3 consecutive layers in the scale space in dog maps in the scale space are observed. And then by identifying maximal values in these 3 times 3 times 3 neighborhood, extremal points of this dog feature are detected for a particular image in its particular scale space. By that, as commented before, not only that features that have strong response are found, but also by finding their maxima in the scale space, a characteristic scale for that particular feature is also detected. Finally, we commented very briefly, but now we may recall that when we perform scale space analysis and when we do this smoothing, then by losing level of detail, we are also, let's say, losing exact localization of the points. So this smoothing kind of moves these locations of the images across the different scales. So once when detected, these maxima values in the scale space are then tracked back to the image with the highest resolution, with our original image, and suitable interpolation is also applied so that improved localization of each of the detected features somewhere in the scale space is then propagated to the original image. After that, we have a number of feature points detected. And now we want to focus on those that are most important. And these should be strong enough. So the next step would be to simply eliminate low contrast responses, where this value in the dog scale space is smaller than a certain threshold. So we simply threshold the values with the, again, recommended particular parameter to use. And finally, we want to focus on the corners and to eliminate responses to the edges. And there we use Hessian, essentially, which we already talked about. So we have this Hessian matrix of the second order partial derivatives. And we again, now we want to look at, let's say, its eigenvalues, essentially. So we have that same correspondence already mentioned that we talked about Harris, which connects trace and the determinant of the matrix with its eigenvalues. Looking at the ratio, we can define, we can identify values where locations where eigenvalues are large and similar enough. And again, this is simplified, like computation of the eigenvalues and subsequent analysis is simplified by taking a certain parameter, computing this particular expression, and thresholding. However, here we are keeping the values which are small enough. Small ratio corresponds to high eigenvalues of a similar size. And here we have an example which just shows how the number of the detected points is then, let's say, reduced by filtering out those that are, let's say, not strong enough, not suitable enough. So after scale space analysis, we have a bunch of points detected. This is what we get after removing those that are at a low contrast, and then further eliminating those that have this value larger than our predefined threshold. We keep these points, which are then identified so that they're scale invariant, they are strong in terms of correspond to high contrast regions, and they correspond to locations where we can talk about some corner points or ridge structure around. Now we have the points detected. Now we want to describe them. So now we are adding the step of, first of all, normalization for particular, or with respect to orientation, which will make SIFT rotationally invariant. So when we have a detected point, as described in the previous part of the algorithm, we are looking at a region around. We have a certain grid recommended to be, let's say, 4 times 4. We are looking at gradient direction in the surrounding region of the point. And we are looking at, let's say, principal orientation. So we are looking at the gradients in that surrounding region. We are looking at their strength and their direction. And by looking at a histogram, let's say dominant orientation with a strong magnitude, we can, let's say, orient this whole patch around the detected feature point in with respect to that main gradient orientation of the intensities around the point. By that, we in some way also detect some characteristic orientation after detecting and defining characteristic scale, and that then leads to rotation invariance of this feature detector. Finally, within that patch, we want to find, like, we want to essentially encode this characteristic structure, this content that is that exists in the patch around the detected feature point. And that is done by further subdivision of this 4 times 4 region into 4 times 4 subregions, each of them, and looking at the histogram of gradients. So in all these points that we get by this subdivision, we are looking at, we are computing gradients, we are observing 8 directions, and we are computing histogram of these directions of gradients in each of these, let's say, subregions. So each of these 4 times 4 regions is then assigned a histogram of gradients, of 8 directional gradients characteristic for that particular region. And by that, we have, we can have like 4 times 4, 8 valued histograms of gradients in the whole, this like bunch of subregions around the point. We can concatenate these histograms and create a description that can be then encoded as a vector, which then has 128 values. So from 4 times 4 regions and 8 gradient directions, or histogram with 8 pins corresponding to 8 observed gradient directions. And this 128 valued vector is SIFT descriptor or description that we use for each identified SIFT feature. Finally, this is one of an example of detected SIFT features in an image. Here we see that when SIFT features are detected, then each of them comes with information about principal direction and also different scale, which is encoded by the magnitude of these vectors. There are different ways of showing SIFT features. Some are still with the size of a circle, which would then correspond to the magnitude of this vector, and in some other way identified principal direction of these feature points. So this is in any way the information that we get from SIFT features, and finally after these features are detected, as commented in the previous slide, they are also encoded, each of them, each of these as 128th long vector. Now we have we went through SIFT feature detector and descriptor, as said, quite engineered approach with many steps along the way. Some are harvesting from the other previously suggested algorithms, such as scale space, log, dog, Hessian, and eigenvalues analysis, and so on. Many parameters to tune, many suggested ones. A result of all this is really good performance with, as already listed, a number of appreciated properties that we can have from feature detector and descriptor.